Now, Sam. Quiet. Quiet.
Good morning, Mr. Mockler. Morning, Sam.
Morning, Mr. Dial.
Morning, Mr. Mockler.
Tom. I had a very strange communication.
Strange, Mr. Mockler.
Yes, listen to this. Dr. Scott Rowe is dead, Mr. Mockler. I know he is dead because a new man is here. A younger man called Dr. Friendman. He looks at us smiling with his unblinking eyes. Miss Atchison says you can tell at a glance that he has practiced hypnosis.
From a friend, is it, Mr. Mockler?
I don't know who it's from. I am a woman in prison because I once saw ghosts. I am paid for by the man who was my husband, who writes out checks for the peaches they bring to my room, and the beef olives, and, what's this? What's this, Tom?
Marron glacé. It's chestnuts, Mr. Mockler.
Yes. In this house, there are 20 disturbed women in private rooms, cosseted by luxury, because other people feel guilty. She must, above all things, be happy. I can hear the fat man who was my husband saying. Miss Atchison is 78, exactly twice my age. She was committed in 1913 because she was disturbed by visions of Saint Olaf of Norway. Such visions were an embarrassment to Miss Atchison's family. No one has been to see her since 1927.
It's a lunatic asylum.
Committed? You say committed about an asylum.
There's nothing the matter with Sarah Crookham either, any more than there is with Miss Atchison or myself. All that Sarah Crookham suffers from is a broken heart. You must write it all down, Miss Atchison said to Sarah Crookham when she first came here, weeping, poor thing, every minute of the day. So she wrote it down and posted it to A.J. Rawson, a person she found in the telephone directory. But Mr. Rawson never came, nor another person Sarah Crookham wrote to. I've looked you up in the telephone directory, Mr. Mockler. It's nice to have a visitor.
Well, I'm beggared.
But does she give no name, Mr. Mockler?
Oh, she appears to be a Mrs. Ackland. Well, how are you today, Mrs. Ackland? Dr. Friendman asked, but of course I would not tell him.
She wants a visitor, poor thing.
I can't go visiting strange women. I can't go just like that. Besides, there's no address here.
She's all confused. Doesn't know whether she's coming or going.
I never heard of a woman writing to the telephone book before.
You just imagine her passing her finger down a list of names.
So she comes to one she likes the sound of. Great.
That's quite upsetting. Quite upsetting.
Best, really. Best, really.
Been away at all, Mr. Swales? Holidays at all?
No.
Mrs. Swales well, is she?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Well, I think that's it. First fitting in 4 weeks. The 31st, Mr. Swales.
31st.
Good 2 stone he's put on, I'd say.
The afternoon post. You read it to us, Tom.
It's got the address. You must begin at the beginning, Miss Atchison said. And so I am doing that. The beginning is back a bit in January 1949, when I was 15. We lived in Richmond then, my parents and one brother, George, and my sisters, Alice and Isabel. On Sundays, after lunch, we used to walk all together in Richmond Park with our dog, a Dalmatian called Salmon. I was the oldest, and Alice was next, 2 years younger, and George was 11, and Isabel 8. It was lovely walking all together in Richmond Park, and then going home to Sunday tea. I remember the autumns and winters best, the coziness of the coal fire, hot sponge cake, and special Sunday sandwiches and little buns that Alice and I always helped to make on Sunday mornings. We played Monopoly by the fire, and George would always have the ship, and Alice the hat, and Isabel the racing car, and Mummy the dog. Daddy and I would share the old boot. I really loved it.
Go on.
I loved the house. 17 Lorelei Avenue, an ordinary suburban house built sometime in the early 1920s when Miss Atchison was still quite young. There were bits of stained glass on either side of the hall door and a single stained glass pane, Moses in the bulrushes, in one of the landing windows. At Christmas time especially, it was lovely. We'd have the Christmas tree in the hall, and always on Christmas Eve, as long as I can remember, there'd be a party. I can remember the parties quite vividly. there'd be people standing round drinking punch, and all the children would play hide and seek upstairs, and nobody could ever find George. It's George, Mr. Mockler, whom all this is about, and Alice, of course, and Isabel, Mr. Mockler. When I first described them to Dr. Scott Rowe, he said they sounded marvellous, and I said that I thought they probably were marvellous, but I suppose a person can be prejudiced in family matters of that kind, because they were, after all, my brother and my two sisters, and because, of course, they're dead now. I mean, they were probably ordinary children, just like any children. Well, you can see what you think, Mr. Mockler. I had a cold the day it happened. A Saturday it was. I was cross because they all kept worrying about leaving me in the house on my own. They'd bring me back black magic chocolates, they said. And my mother said she'd buy a bunch of daffodils if she saw any. I heard the car crunching over the gravel outside the garage, and then their voices telling Salmon not to put his paws on the upholstery. My father blew the horn, saying goodbye to me, and after that the silence began. I must have known, even then, long before it happened, that nothing would be the same again. There's a photograph here. There's a photograph of the house. 17 Lorelei Avenue. 17 Lorelei Avenue. Shall I continue, Mr. Mockler? There's a lot more, actually.
I don't want to hear any more of it. It's got nothing to do with me, any of it. I may show it to the police. That's ridiculous. It's completely ridiculous.
When I was 22, Mr. Mockler, I married a man called Ackland, who helped me to get over the tragedy. George would have been 18, and Alice 20, and Isabel 15. They would have liked my husband because he was a good-humored and generous man. We lived in the country, in a large house not far from where my husband worked. He's a rich man. He made a fortune designing metal fasteners for the aeroplane industry.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm sorry I'm so late.
It's all right.
Oh, you've been all right?
Of course.
I've got to go away. Probably on Thursday.
For long?
3 or 4 weeks to Germany. You could come.
No.
I'd like you to come.
No, I must be sensible. I'll be quite all right here. After all, the Rachels are here.
You wouldn't be in the way.
I must grow up.
I made you a nice egg and bacon pie. I've made you a nice egg and bacon pie.
Thank you, Mrs. Rachels. Shall I call your husband in?
Oh, that will be kind of you.
Mr. Rachels! Mr. Rachels, lunch! Thank you. Thank you very much.
She's missing him, poor thing.
Isn't healthy. Being cooped up like that.
Oh, no. She isn't all that cooped up. She was weeding the lily beds, she said.
That was a prize lily, that was. Really prize one.
You didn't say anything. You didn't go getting cross.
One thing she hasn't got, and that's green fingers.
Oh, my dear, you haven't eaten a thing. You'll go to skin and bone, you know.
Did you know, Mrs. Rachels? Did I ever tell you about George and Alice and Isabel?
George?
My brother and my 2 sisters. Look, this is the house where we lived. 17 Lorelei Avenue. That was George's room. The others were round the back.
Very nice.
They were all killed, Mrs. Rachels. My mother and my father and George and Alice and Isabel. A tyre burst on a lorry, and the lorry went whizzing round and round on the road.
How awful, madam. How terrible.
Salmon was killed also.
Salmon?
Our Dalmatian.
I didn't know that. I didn't know any of that.
It was the happiest house you could possibly imagine. Now I'm going to help your husband.
thought, you know. I always thought there was something like that about the poor creature. God can be cruel.
I wonder he married her.
Will.
Oh, I'm not saying anything against her. All I am saying is...
He married her because he loved her.
On the corner, whoop-whoop, beneath the berry tree. Head on the footpath behind the bush, looking for Henry Lee. Here on the corner, whoop-whoop, beneath the berry tree. Head on the footpath.
Moi, je vais en vacances à Stockholm, en Angleterre. Et si vous voulez certainement savoir les détails du temps, si vous êtes déjà...
What a lovely morning.
He's not coming back today.
Mr. Ackland? Oh, but he said
It'll be another 3 weeks.
Oh, I am sorry. I am sorry, Mrs. Ackland. Still, business is business, I dare say. And 3 weeks isn't all that long.
You have your own bathroom, Mrs. Rachel's. I would prefer it if neither you nor your husband used mine.
But we don't.
If your bathroom's out of order, I'm sure my husband would wish you to have it repaired, rather than use mine.
But, madam, we don't use yours.
I would like to be alone now. I'm sorry I was cross, Mrs. Rachel's. I didn't understand, you see.
We would never use your bathroom, Mrs. Ackland.
Of course not. the breakfast table, and then I understood.
Did you want it laid before?
It's a private matter, Mrs. Rachel's.
Yes, of course.
How odd of Mrs. Rachel's to lay all those places, I thought. I was about to call you back and ask you. Then I understood.
But I didn't.
Of course not. Funny thing happened in the middle of the night. Dance band started playing. Could have been Victor Sylvester, but I don't think it was. It was a tune called Henry Lee.
I see.
An old song of the 50s. Oh, there's no need to be frightened. I'd left the wireless on, you see. And when at 4:30 in the morning some foreign station started up, on came Henry Lee. Must have turned the wrong switch before going to bed. Must be getting absent-minded. People do, they say, when they live alone. It's funny how things always happen in threes.
Yes.
The wireless, the bath, and the breakfast table.
You mean you laid the table yourself, Mrs. Ackland, and had a bath?
Funny how there's always an explanation. Mrs. Rachels, would you do something for me? If you're going down to the village, would you bring me back a box of black magic chocolates?
I saw you move, Alice. And you, George. Right back to the beginning. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
She had children with her. She had 3 children with her.
Will, there couldn't have been. There couldn't be any children here.
She's enticed him. She wanders about the place and she's enticed him.
That's no way to talk. They're dead and buried, those poor little things. Less said about them, the better.
What is it, Vi? Oh, what is it?
I'm sorry, Mrs. Ackland. I'm sorry, too. But they were there, but...
Yes.
Laughing. They were laughing.
My wife's not strong, Mum. It's not fair.
Goodbye.
You shouldn't stop here, Mrs. Ackland. It's wrong for you to stop here.
I'll be quite all right. I've never been happier, Mrs. Rachel's.
My wife's right, Mrs. Ackland. You must go. It's not wise what you're doing.
I'm not doing anything. I'm really not doing anything. They went away, Mr. Mockler, and I never saw them again. And nothing was any good after that. I suppose you have to be frightened of ghosts. I suppose that's their way of communicating. I mean, it's no good being like me, delighting in it all. It was the Rachels they really had fun with. I was frightened myself in that big house, now that everyone had left me. I didn't want to leave the kitchen. Not ever again, in a way. I'm coming! You've got fatter. Your hair's shorter.
Oh. What on earth's going on? Where are the Rachels?
Rachel's? Left.
What about the house? There's food lying all over the place.
I know.
You're not ill. My dear, you are. You are. You're very, very
No,
ill.
please don't touch me. I'd like to tell you. I want to tell you.
Yes, go on.
They gave me signs. George turned the wireless on in the middle of the night.
And Alice had a bath, and Isabel laid the breakfast table for 4. I had to tell lies about all that to the Rachels. I knew by an instinct that I had to say I'd left the wireless on, left the bath in, laid the breakfast table myself. I knew by an instinct that the Rachels mustn't go. Do you understand? They didn't eat the chocolates, you know. Look. I found them all in a pile in one of the breakfast room drawers. It was Alice who did that, you see, so as not to hurt my feelings. I should have known that dead children can't eat. But they can play. And they can stand there laughing at the Rachels until the Rachels are frightened half out of their wits.
Yes, yes, of course.
No. No, you don't understand. You don't know how I felt when I found out they were more interested in annoying the Rachels than comforting me. You don't know how lonely I've been without them. Sometimes I want to die because the loneliness is so much.
Quiet, Sam. Quiet, quiet!
Good morning, Mr. Mockler.
Good morning. That woman, she wrote again.
That woman? Did you show the other one to the police, Mr. Mockler?
Well, it's not a case for policemen, is it? Read it, read both of them.
Well, I'm beggared.
Blimey.
Funny thing, seeing ghosts like that.
Funny thing altogether. I was telling them last night in the Charles II about her.
Look, I'd rather you didn't.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Mockler.
Best not to talk about it.
I came into this room last night without knowing a thing about those ghosts that woman talks about. I could feel them here.
Those children.
Sam could feel them too.
Sam?
What are you going to do, Mr. Mockler?
I don't know what I'm going to do.
Poor creature. Poor creature.
Well, she wants is a visitor. That other woman hasn't had a visitor since 1927.
People maybe don't care to visit an asylum.
I wouldn't know what to say to her. I've never spoken to a mad woman.
Well, maybe you could tell us something about tailoring.
A woman in an asylum wouldn't want to know about tailoring.
A.J. Mockler, tailor, it says in the book. Maybe she wrote specially. Maybe she wants to know all about tailoring.
It's as if she was extra sensitive.
Sensitive?
To make up. Like a blind person has a compensation or a deaf person. It's as if she could call up those children.
But she couldn't keep them there, though.
Huh? No. No, she wasn't able to keep them.
Yes.
Well...
Yes.
Well, I've had a letter asking me to come. My name is Mockler.
A letter from Dr. Friendman?
No, from a patient, from Mrs. Ackland.
Dr. Friendman will see you, Mr. Mockler.
Well, it was Mrs. Ackland.
How very good of you to come. How very humane.
I've had some letters from Mrs. Ackland.
Yes, quite so, Mr. Mockler. Mr. Mockler, could I press you towards a glass of sherry?
Oh, that's very kind of you.
My name is Friendman. Well, here's your very good health, Mr. Mockler.
I brought the letters with me, just to remind her, just to explain. I thought she might be confused.
In truth, you didn't know quite what to think, eh? Shall I just glance at them? Thank you. Oh, yes. Quite so. Mr. Mockler.
Hmm?
Here, try these.
Ah.
Just, see? I find them useful. One has to keep an eye, you know. Do sit down, Mr. Mockler. The letters are a bit inaccurate, Mr. Mockler.
Inaccurate?
It wasn't quite like that at 17 Lorelei Avenue. She can't forget Lorelei Avenue. I don't suppose she ever will. That beautiful woman, Mr. Mockler, was once a beautiful girl. And yet she married the first man that asked her. A widower 30 years older than herself. An obese designer of aircraft fasteners. He pays all her bills, as she says in the letter, and even after he's dead, they'll go on being paid. He used to visit her at first, but he found it too painful. He stood in this room and said to Dr. Scott Rowe that no man had ever been appreciated by a woman as much as he had been by her. And all because he'd been kind to her in the most ordinary ways.
I'm afraid I don't quite understand.
But unfortunately, it was too late for kindness. 17 Lorelei Avenue had done its damage, like a cancer in her mind. She could not forget her childhood.
Yes, she says in her letters, George and Alice and Isabel.
All her childhood, Mr. Mockler. Her parents did not speak to each other. They didn't quarrel, they didn't address each other in any way whatsoever. When she was 5, they'd come to an agreement that they should both go on living at 17 Lorelei Avenue. Well, because neither of them would ever have agreed to give up an inch of the child that between them they caused to be born. In that house, Mr. Mockler, there was nothing. For all her childhood years. Nothing. Except silence.
But there were George and Alice and Isabel.
No, Mr. Mockler. There was no George, no Alice, and no Isabel. No games of hide and seek. No parties on Christmas Eve. No Monopoly on Sundays by the fire. I mean, can you imagine that house, Mr. Mockler, as she is now incapable of imagining it? Two people so cruel to one another that they knew that either of them could be parted from the child in some divorce court. A woman bitterly hating the man she once loved. And the man returning jealously each evening, hurrying back from the office in case his wife and his child were having a conversation. She would sit, Mr. Mockler, in a room with them, with their hatred for one another heavy in the air. All three of them would sit down to a meal, and still no one would speak. No other children came to the house. No other people. She used to hide on her way home from school. She would go down the area steps of other people's houses and crouch beside dustbins.
Dustbins?
But other children didn't take to her, you see. She couldn't talk to them. And she'd never learnt to talk to anyone. Mr. Ackland was a patient man when he came along. A good and patient man.
Her parents were monsters.
No one is a monster, Mr. Mockler.
But to treat a child like that...
Oh, yes, quite so, quite so. So now you understand. You understand, Mrs. Ackland?
No, I don't. What, she made everything up, did she? A brother and sisters, a mother and father who were happy? But her husband and...
Her husband married again, as a matter of fact, and who can blame him? He tried to do too much, you see, without professional aid.
The Rachels, surely the Rachels were real too.
Yes, of course they were real. And so was the house that she's written to you about, where she was taken as a bride.
But why did the Rachels leave? What frightened them?
I don't believe in ghosts, Mr. Mockler. And in any case, you could hardly have ghosts of children who didn't exist. You would prefer to believe, Mr. Mockler, that the Rachels have been frightened of Mrs. Ackland's ghosts, even though they were artificial ones. You would prefer to believe that because they were real to her, they became real to the Rachels. That shadows stepped out of her mind because in her loneliness she'd wished them to, that they'd laughed and played and frightened the Rachels half out of their wits, as she says in the letter.
What else?
No. No, Mr. Mockler. The Rachels left that house and have never been heard of since. They left that house because a disturbed woman alarmed them. Black magic chocolates and pieces of cake left for imaginary children. Tables laid for 4, and baths she ran herself. I don't think we can blame the Rachels.
But she says so in her letters. She makes it quite plain. You know why the Rachels left that house. What she says is true.
I don't think either of us can know what's true, Mr. Mockler.
But I can feel it. When I read the letters, I can feel the truth in them.
The children
It doesn't matter that they weren't real. There can be ghosts like that, just as there can be in any other way. They did step out of her mind.
Oh, come now, Mr. Mockler. Come now, please. Well, shall we visit my patient now, Mr. Mockler? That is, if you still wish to.
I've come to see her. She's written to me, and I've come to see her.
Mrs. Ackland, look, a visitor. This is Mr. Mockler, my dear. It's all right, my dear, it's quite all right.
How do you do, Mrs. Ackland?
You wrote to Mr. Mockler. You asked him to come, remember?
For a moment, I thought you were Mr. Rachels. When I saw you...
No, he's not Mr. Rachels.
I was going to tell you they were only having fun. They didn't mean to frighten you.
You found my name in a telephone directory, Mrs. Ackland. I'm a tailor, actually. You said you'd like a visitor, Mrs. Ackland.
Miss Atchison hasn't had a visitor since 1927.
So you said in your letter.
She's as sane as you or I, you know.
Yes.
I'm glad you've come, Mr. Mockler.
I just wanted to tell you that... I just wanted to tell you that I was... that I felt... I was aware of your ghosts, Mrs. Ackland. The children. George and Alice and Isabel.
You saw them?
I think what Mr. Mockler means...
What I mean is... They were in my house. I was aware of them, Mrs. Ackland. So was my dog. Your letter was on the mantelpiece in my workroom, and
I think Mrs. Ackland may be fatigued, Mr. Mockler. We mustn't overdo it,
They
you know.
came to you. They came to you like they came to the Rachels. They didn't mean to frighten you, Mr. Mockler, nor your dog. They didn't mean to.
they didn't at all, Mrs. Ackland. But they were there, like shadows, Mrs. Ackland.
How lovely for you. How nice. How very nice.
I really think we should be going now.
They wanted to make me read the rest of your letters. They wanted to make me come and see you.
People said they never existed. My husband, who used to be so kind, turned round and sent me here, to a place for the insane.
Of course they exist. The Rachels saw them, and they were in my house. I just thought I just thought I'd come and tell you that.
You'll come again. You'll come again and tell me again. You'll remind me that you and your dog...
Yes, of course.
I need to be reminded. I need a visitor to remind me.
Mr. Mockler, please.
Yes, of course. Goodbye, Mrs. Ackland.
It's very good of you to try to be kind, Mr. Mockler. In your kindness, you put back my work with that patient by several years.
I told the truth.
With my help, Mrs. Ackland was just beginning to cope with reality.
Perhaps that was why she wrote to a name in a telephone directory. Perhaps she doesn't want to cope.
Isn't it better to try? Since reality is here.
The Rachels saw those children.
There is an explanation for everything, Mr. Mockler.
But there isn't. The Rachels saw the ghosts. I sensed them myself.
You intend to return, Mr. Mockler?
I don't know.
Get them back together. One, other, two. Back together. One, two, three,
Somewhere in England or somewhere in this world, the Rachels are still alive. If I was younger, I'd go and find them. I'd like to see Dr. Friendman when they told him the truth. Because it seems hard that on top of everything else, a woman's artificial ghost shouldn't be properly honored. Since she brought them into being and gave them life. Like other women give other children life. Seems a pity not to honor them at all.
They're honored here. George and Alice and Isabel. God save the memory of them.
And you'll probably go back, Mr. Mockler. You'll probably go back again.